notifications on Do Not Disturb. Text me just in case I don't have that number, but I'll be texting this one in case I need it.
walking and not looking.
Ladies and gentlemen, your Congressman Gaetz.
Thank you all so much. Oh my gosh. Thank you all so much for coming out. You know, in Washington, D.C., they sometimes ask me how I do the things I do. I say, you should meet my bosses back in Northwest Florida. Well, when I first ran for this job 7 years ago, I said I was running to fight Washington to restore the great promise of this country. And I'm hoping after the last few weeks, you still see I got a lot of fight left in me. We took on the swamp, and we won. But I had to tell some of those folks up in Washington, when you get to draining the swamp, sometimes the alligators and the snakes and the vermin, they don't like it too much. They hiss and holler and bite. Sometimes you got to endure a little venom to get the job done. Well, I let them know I'm a Florida man. We've drained some swamps before, and I know of what I speak. I want to take a moment. If you have served in our military, if you're an active duty veteran, raise your hand, stand up. Let us give you the honor you deserve right here in Northwest Florida. Thank you all so much. The greatest blessing, other than being the son of Don and Vicki Gaetz and knowing Jesus Christ in my heart, is being a member of this community. Because military families are not just a feature of Northwest Florida, they are the defining characteristic. And when the days get long and tough, I think I haven't been home in about 6 weeks until yesterday, I think of the sacrifice of those who put on the uniform and those who love them and those who send them into the fight. My sense is that this is a fighting district, and each and every day you deserve a fighting congressman. So here's what happened. I've been dying to get home to share with you the tales of the trail. In January, I had endured too much. I had seen that time after time, the politicians pass omnibus spending bills that are thousands of pages long. They give you about a day to read it, and then you have to take one up or down vote on the funding of the entire government all at once. And that has resulted in a nation sitting atop a $33 trillion debt, facing $2 trillion annual deficits. So you have to wonder, who would design a system like this? Would you ever run a family like this? We're going to spend all the money this year or none of it? Would you ever run a business this way? But very powerful people buy off politicians who accumulate influence, and then they expect favors in return for that. And the only way the favors they get can withstand any scrutiny is if they're tucked into some massive bill where if you don't vote for it, they're going to say you're not for the veterans or our troops or our seniors or the disabled or vulnerable people in our country, people we'd want to support. And so that's how they do it each and every year. And when we had a 4-seat majority, many said it would be the cause of unknown calamity. We would never be successful, but I saw a 4-seat majority as opportunity back at the beginning of this year to use leverage. What I've learned throughout the history of this country is that powerful people never give it away unless you take it. Okay? These corrupt influences are established for a reason, and it sometimes requires great political force and risk-taking in order to drive the outcomes that put the needs of the people before the corrupt. And so we said that if Speaker McCarthy wanted to take that gavel in January, there were certain things we were going to demand. Like, I don't know, we wanted 72 hours before the bills were presented in order to be able to read them. And they called us crazy when we asked for that. And then a big one to us is that we not spend so much money. Federal government spending increased 40% during COVID. 40%. So you would think when the emergency is over, you would be able to reduce some of that spending. But no, they just all want to keep their snouts down in the trough. They want to keep escalating the amount of money that they're printing so that each and every dollar you earn is worth less. So now we live in a time where in over 90% of counties in the United States of America, the average person on the average income cannot afford a home, cannot afford the American dream. More people are right now facing repossessions of autos than at any time in 15 years in this country. And we've got over 60% of Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck. And when that paycheck doesn't quite get you to the next one, folks are using credit cards more and more, and you are seeing the APR on these credit cards skyrocket. And you're not getting any more for it. In America today, the average family is spending $700 more for the same goods and services that they got last year. And why is that happening? Because we have this corrupt system that allows money to be spent without any specific itemized review. And there's no agency of the federal government that wouldn't do good to have a little light shed on it, to go over program by program and see what's working and what's not. And so one of the key things we demanded were single subject spending bills. One issue at a time, one agency at a time, not all that lumped all together. When we do that, we're not going to win them all, my friends. I go up there to Washington. Some of them are socialists. Some of them are communists. Some of them are throwing Hamas pep rallies in the middle of the Capitol building. So they don't all think like us all the time. But you know what? We got to be willing to have the vote and to force the issue and to put it before the people. And then the people can see if their representatives are actually representing them, or if they're taking the money from the lobbyists and the special interests to do corrupt things. And then you know what? Then we go work together and we defeat those people and we get the government we deserve. It doesn't happen any other way. So we were promised all those things. And then sure enough, before there are 12 appropriations bills we got to pass, before Congress took a 6-week vacation, we passed one of them. Just one of them. Now, not doing your work and heading off to vacation is not what our value set would allow here in Northwest Florida, and it is not what we should tolerate from the Congress of the United States. When I was home talking to folks, they said, Matt, we believed in you in January. We wanted those single subject bills. We were promised to vote on term limits. We were promised to vote on a balanced budget amendment. And we don't see those things happening, and we have eyes and ears, and we know what's going on. And so you told us about this motion to vacate, where if any one member wanted to call the question on the leader of the institution, they'd have the ability to bring that power to account. It is. Thank you. I want you to know, you as my bosses, as the people I literally work for, I want you to know I did not take this decision lightly. I prayed about it, I thought about it, I consulted with people, but ultimately, I didn't feel it would be fair for me to stand before you again, having not delivered on the promises that we made in January about institutional change. You know, whenever you do anything in politics that makes a difference, it involves a certain level of risk. Where I go to work each and every day, I walk underneath the murals of Jefferson and Madison and Adams and Washington. These men took enormous risk to carve this country out of a wilderness. In the worst days, in Valley Forge, when Congress and Washington were fighting and sending nasty letters back and forth to one another, Washington devised the plan in some of the most desperate of circumstances to cross the Delaware River and surprise the Hessians. That took risk, and it's the reason we have a country today. So I knew there would be risk. I knew there was a possibility that maybe the Democrats would kind of like this McCarthy fella. And I let them know, I'm done owning him. So if y'all want to own him, you can own him. But it wouldn't be on Northwest Florida's representative that we were going to own him anymore. And it turns out they didn't want to own him either. Because the one thing we all had in common is that he had misrepresented things to everyone. And see, in Washington, when people tell lies, it's sort of impolite to call them on it. And to say that wasn't true, you said something different, and now I demand you account for the thing you had said. No. You're actually the impolite one, the reckless one, if you call them out on their lies. So we brought to that moment, and then, after McCarthy had been vacated, the fight was not over. I put out on every platform we have, and I certainly hope you follow me at Matt Gaetz anywhere on social media, that you follow our podcast, Firebrand, so that you get the news directly, not filtered by the mainstream media. And when we put out the information at that time, the fight wasn't over because we had to upgrade the position. My promise to all of you is that the Speaker of the House would be more conservative and more honest. And in Mike Johnson of Louisiana, I have fulfilled both of those commitments. Now, I would have taken Jim Jordan of Ohio if they'd have given it to me. And for a boy from the South to be for someone from a Big Ten state, that really took a lot. But during those votes for Jordan, you remember what the headline said? Matt Gaetz is full of chaos. Well, you know what? There's times when you can have constructive chaos and you can bring order out of chaos. And they said that, and then they said, well, we'll never get someone better. Because here's what McCarthy was doing. Anytime when Jordan was put up, McCarthy tried to knife him. And he was successful. And then when Scalise was put up, knifed him too, knifed the next guy. And then there was this interesting moment where a moderate Republican from New York City got up and said, Tom Emmer just lost, so instead of doing all over again, could we just raise our hands and see if anybody's got a problem with Mike Johnson? Could we do a roll call? He's an honest guy, a good guy, done good work for us, has shown leadership on the Republican team. And guess who objected and went crazy? Kevin McCarthy. And then you know what? Everyone on our Republican team saw that it was Kevin McCarthy who was sowing chaos and desperately trying to cling to power. And he was standing in the way of our team coming together and gelling. I can tell you, in the moment when we designated Mike Johnson, the first thing he called us all to do was pray. Because there is a power at work in this country that is stronger and more dispositive and more meaningful than any politician, from President of the United States down to our local government, and it is Almighty God. And then you know what? Mike Johnson said after that, we're getting to work on our appropriations bills. We're going to get these things up, and we're going to take amendment votes, and we're going to stay late if necessary and get the job done. It took 7 months to pass the first government funding bill under Kevin McCarthy. We passed our first one under Mike Johnson in one day. I'm not for lashing all these disparate agencies together, where I got to vote for the woke Department of Education the same time I got to vote for our veterans and our roads and our health care. That is not a way we should behave, and it is the only true way we get accountability. In the coming days, I plan to meet with the Speaker to talk about those other commitments. Vote on a balanced budget amendment, vote on term limits, and a full release of the January 6th tapes to the public, unedited, unabridged. When every news agency out there was dragging me through the mud, saying every bad word about me you could possibly say, I looked in the moments in history where members of Congress had to stand up and fight for something that really mattered to them, and sometimes the consequences that come their way. Northwest Florida's greatest congressman was Bob Sykes. He's the reason we have Eglin Air Force Base. He's the reason we have I-10. Libraries and schools and roads are named after him all throughout our community. We got crossways with some of the folks in Washington one year, and they kicked him off all his committees. And then he came home and had a rally something like this and was overwhelmingly reelected to go back and serve the people in Northwest Florida. I looked a little further back. The only president to ever serve in the House of Representatives following their term, John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams finishes his term serves as president from 1825 to 1829. In 1830, he goes into the House of Representatives. And you weren't really supposed to be talking anything about slavery one way or the other in 1830 because it was a very tense issue. But you see, John Quincy Adams said, I'm going to make some people uncomfortable. I'm going to bring up my resolutions to point out the intolerability and inhumanity of slavery. He filed petitions on behalf of slaves. They called him a chaos agent. They threatened him with censure or expulsion. His colleagues started to hate him, but he went back to the floor time and again because he knew that his job was to stand up for people in this country and our fellow human beings and not to follow the script of a corrupt Washington, D.C. 14 years later, after he had spoken out against something called the gag rule, it was repealed, and thereafter we abolished slavery in this country because sometimes the people's house has to actually be for the people of our land and not for those who bribe and buy off our politicians. Now the path ahead requires some immediate work. And we got a few crises that are intersecting on us right now. You know, we got our border that's wide open. We have our great ally, Israel, that is under attack from people who do not even deserve to walk the planet Earth for what they have done. And we also have so many of our politicians want to send more of your money to Ukraine. I guess the first $115 billion wasn't enough. Now, I hope Ukraine wins. But I don't think that we should have to borrow money from China to send money to Ukraine to make us look stronger to China. That's foolish. Joe Biden stepped forward and he had already had agreement from Kevin McCarthy that they were going to force one vote on Israel, the border, and Ukraine all at once. Now, I imagine if we talked with everybody here in this group, there'd be folks who'd see those things a little different. And regardless of how you view those things, the border and Israel and Ukraine are very different challenges, and each one of them deserves a separate vote. I think that there is certainly a case to be made that we must stand with our ally Israel, but I don't think we should borrow money from China to do it. So I talked to the speaker today, and he had a pretty good idea about where to find the $14 billion to send to Israel, and the best place he could find it in the federal government was at the IRS. I love that idea. So we may put it to the Democrats and the senators and say, well, is it more important for you to maintain the tyranny of the IRS than to fight the tyranny of Hamas in Gaza? To get all of this work done, it requires incredible teamwork. And I've shared this story with many of you before. When I first went to D.C., I was told by some of the leadership that they'd been watching my votes, and they'd figured out that I wasn't a team player. And so it turns out I'm a great team player. It's just that all of you aren't my team. The people in Northwest Florida who I work for, who send me, that's my team, and you can never separate me from them. But we have great, it requires great team members at every level of government. We've got some terrific state legislators who are at a delegation meeting, or they would be here with us tonight. But in Santa Rosa County, we also have critical team members locally. I want, if you're here, wave, where's Ray Eddington and my man James Calkins? And if you don't mind me saying so, I think that we also have a tremendous opportunity in the Florida Senate. My first campaign was when I was 12 years old. I went door to door with my dad as he was running for the school board, because he'd been to too many PTA meetings and spoken up, and so he ran for the school board. And after serving on the school board for a number of years, Don Gaetz was the first non-educator ever elected school superintendent in Okaloosa County history, and he brought our district to #1 in the state for 4 straight years. After that, my dad went on to serve as president of the Florida Senate, where I thank him every day I drive across that Pensacola Bridge and don't have to pay a toll. Thank you for that. So please join me in welcoming my father and the man on a return to the Florida Senate, Don Gaetz. So Dad, I guess before we get into everything that we got to work on together, how bad was Mom wearing you out when she was throwing dinner rolls at Fox News when they were talking bad about me?
What she did, she kept saying, we've got to get those people on the telephone. We've got to go see them. I want to put my finger in their face and tell them about my boy.
Please hold, Sean Hannity. I'm conferencing in my mother.
But I do have to say, Matt, that your mother, who's here today, Vicki, right in the back, behind the tree.
She doesn't like getting on a slope this close to water. Just gain some momentum and keep going.
Vicki and I are very, very glad, son, that you finally come out of your shell. It's been a while.
I hear you. Well, and I guess since you thanked your wife, I have to thank mine, Ginger Gaetz, my lovely wife. Dad, the reason I'm fighting so hard against this federal spending is I know it has a direct relationship to the increased costs people are paying. At the grocery store, when you borrow money to get a car or a house, it is related to federal spending. But here in Florida, life has gotten so good. People keep coming here from everywhere, and cost of living is rising, cost of insurance is rising. How do we make sure that we keep this state affordable for the people that made it the envy of the country?
Well, that's the issue. You know, we're the low-tax state, thank goodness, no income tax. We're the free state of Florida, thanks to 2 great governors and some good legislative leaders. So we're low-tax and we're free, but we're becoming the high interest rate state, the high housing rate state. There are people who want to work in this area. They want to be teachers. They want to be, first responders. They want to work in our merchandise departments of our stores, and they can't afford to live in the communities they work. So we're a high housing cost state, and obviously we're a high insurance rate state if you can get it. And the other thing is, we're, frankly, a high electric bill state. But my view is that a senator can't fix all of that, but a senator can do what a congressman has done, and that's fight like hell on all 3 of those issues. On housing, electric bills, and insurance rates. And that's what I plan to do if you let me come back to the Senate.
One entity that I don't know has been all that neighborly is Florida Power and Light. I have been very frustrated at the fact that a bunch of unelected folks on the Public Service Commission are approving rate increase after rate increase on our power and electric bills so that, for the environment, Florida Power and Light can go and cut down trees and put up a bunch of expensive solar. So then you pay the upfront costs of all of that, and then they get the long-term benefit of the infrastructure being in place. As far as I'm concerned, God bless this country with abundant fossil fuels, and the best carbon capture technology God created is a tree. You know what's pretty? A forest. You know what's ugly? A solar field.
That's right. And the same thing when you look at housing costs. You know, right now, if you had $350,000, you'd have a hard time buying a house. And when you talk about people who are on fixed incomes, people who want to come here and retire, people who are building their own families for the first time, educators, other people like that, they can't afford to live here. And if we can't afford to live here, if we can't afford to pay our electric bills, if we can't afford to get insurance, then we're the unaffordable Florida, and I want to make Florida affordable to live in.
No community can boast the richness that we enjoy from military families, from veterans. And one of the things that we're going to have to continue to work on is responsiveness from the VA, and then ensuring that military families and military spouses can get credentialed here and licensed here and work here, particularly in the area of childcare. You know, right now, one of the real challenges we have at our bases is getting people to go work in childcare. Dad, maybe talk a little bit about our work together on licensing for military spouses and military families.
Matt and I served together in the legislature before he got downgraded to Congress. And one of the things that we decided to do was to press every possible boundary to make Florida more military friendly. And so one thing we did is we found out that if a military family moved here and, you know, the husband or wife had a teaching certificate, then it wasn't accepted by the state of Florida Department of Education. Or if they were a licensed plumber, or if they were a licensed architect, or if they were a licensed pharmacist, or if they were a licensed nurse, that those credentials earned in other states were not being accepted in Florida. So one of the things that we did together in the legislature, and we need to do a heck of a lot more of it if I get back in the Senate, is to make sure that we have accepting of all licensing from all states. As long as people are, you know, have the proper credentials, they ought to come to Florida and go to work in Florida, especially military families.
I want to talk about education policy too. We've got a school district here that's turning out some of the very best students that I get to nominate for service academies. I'll tell you, Navarre High School is punching above their weight. They're putting out some great Red Raiders and getting to nominate those folks for West Point and the Naval Academy and the Air Force Academy. It is the best perk of the job, if you're wondering. It is number one. But increasingly, the education system has turned at odds with many parents and many families, and it's become an adversarial relationship. I think a lot of that sickness and evil comes out of the Federal Department of Education in Washington, D.C. And, man, that guy's got an OG Gaetz sign. That's one from 2016. All right, you've been a fan a while. Half of these people didn't even live in Florida in 2016 when I made those signs. So everyone, you know, you see Republicans that take power and they forget about federalism and decentralizing the authorities that we think belong to the states. And so whether it was George W. Bush passing the No Child Left Behind law, or even some good-intentioned Republicans now wanting the Department of Education to do more and more and create paperwork for teachers, and you know, they're in a big building that they actually share with CNN. So if anything bad happens, I sure hope it's not to that building in Washington, D.C. But my policy on the federal level is not to strengthen the Federal Department of Education, not even to bend it to my wishes, but I have a one-sentence policy on education policy. We should abolish the Federal Department of Education and send all of that authority to our states and to our local school districts where parents can keep an eye on what's going on.
If you've got a child in school, or if you've got a grandchild in school, you can reach out and touch, or you should be able to, your school board member. Because your school
The FBI will investigate you if you do. So
yeah, that's true.
He's saying reach out and touch figuratively, because you'll be on a watch list if otherwise.
Well, you'll be on a watch list with you and me. But, you know, if the decisions are made locally, if they're made at the school level, if they're made at the district level locally, then you can hold people accountable. You have a great school system in Santa Rosa County. When I was superintendent in Okaloosa, we learned from Santa Rosa County how to be a great school system. And you have one. But you're not going to get any help from Washington. All you're going to get is paperwork and mandates and trouble and federal dollars that are tied to strings that go all the way back to interest groups that you don't even want to hear about. So let's decentralize all of that. Grant the money back to the local school districts, and then you hold the teachers and the principals and the school board members responsible for the use of your money in educating your children.
When I got to Washington, I never would have believed how almost every agency there has some feature of its mission that has been perverted to weaponize against the people. I used to think that the FBI and the CDC were the good guys. Yeah, and then one day the CDC wanted the powers of the CIA and ended up with the credibility of CNN. Even the post office. The post office has an internet covert operations program. That's the name of it. They couldn't even think of anything less creepy and weird than that. The post office literally spies on people's social media accounts to determine what your political preferences are, and then they store that information in a database. I'm not like some X-Files conspiracy theorist. This is what they've testified to in our open congressional hearings. And then, of course, we see the way the Justice Department has been turned into the enforcement wing of the Democratic Party. I believe in the upcoming government funding bill, Republicans should at least be forcing votes on defunding Jack Smith and ending the special counsel so that he can't do harm to our nation. We are going to be so much better in this fight with Mike Johnson as our House Speaker. Mike Johnson has litigated cases before the Supreme Court. He is a brilliant lawyer. He sat next to me on the Judiciary Committee for 7 years, so I'm assuming something is rubbed off, right? And we are going to be more driven, more focused, and more strategic under a guy who's a constitutional lawyer than the last guy who literally won the California lottery and then used the proceeds to buy a bakery. That wasn't the person we needed leading the oversight of the Biden crime family. These bank records show that foreign governments and people connected with them are sending money directly to folks in the Biden family. And when I hear people say, well, what if it's not just Joe, it's members of the family? The way you bribe a guy like Joe Biden is to give money to all his kids and grandkids. Anybody knows that. There was no Biden family business other than influence peddling and corruption. And frankly, the best defense they have is that a lot of people in Washington are doing it. I made the argument on the House floor that they've done so much to drive up inflation, you can no longer bribe Democrat senators with cash alone. You have to use gold bars to bribe the Democrat senators. But make no mistake, while it is personally gratifying to get these folks like Christopher Wray and Merrick Garland and John Durham and the ATF director in front of us to ask, so that I can ask questions and they can be exposed for what they're doing. You know what they do on most days? They smile, they laugh, they go back to their agency, they cash the check that Congress sends them, and they keep doing that work. That's why changing the way we're doing business in Washington is so important. Right here in our community, the ATF is targeting federal firearm licensees who are selling the guns that allow us to preserve our Second Amendment rights. I went to a blue state recently and I asked one of the licensees, well, do you get harassed by the ATF? They said, oh no, because our state gun laws are so repressive, the ATF just focuses on the red states. And they go to places like our community where we value our freedom and our self-defense, and they go and harass people. So I'm done just yelling at them and screaming at them. My dad told me a saying in our family that goes back generations. Don't tell me what your values are. Show me your checkbook and your calendar, and I can tell what your values are. And it's time to cut off the money to these weaponized agencies of government. Judge us by that. Do we keep sending them to check?
I got to ask you, Matt, if you remember, when you and I served in the legislature, you were chairman of one of the Justice Committees in the House of Representatives in Tallahassee. And there was a big effort. They brought in all kinds of people. They brought in a lot of African-American leaders. They brought in people from other states. And they were going to repeal, or they were going to weaken, or they were going to water down the Stand Your Ground law that you and I fought so hard to get into Florida law. And Matt was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and he had to face down all these people. Tell them what you did.
I told them they could have all the debates they wanted, and at the end, we were not going to change one damn comma of the Florida Stand Your Ground law. And sometimes folks ask me, these members of Congress from other states and jurisdictions, they say, well, how can you just go have town hall meetings and rallies out in the open? Aren't you worried someone would come there and do harm? And I said, well, where I'm from, we believe in the Second Amendment, not as an esoteric theory, but as a way of life. And it has a tendency to keep everyone real polite. Real polite. Look, my friends, we are in this fight together. That's why I've invited you here tonight on a day God couldn't have made any better for us. And in those tough moments in Washington, I can barely even keep a food tester employed. I had 3 die on me last week. And I go into those rooms, and sometimes they hate me, and are mad at me, and are cussing me. But what sustains me is the courage that I see come through this community, and it is your prayers. Ginger and I cannot thank you enough for praying for me, for fighting for me, and for having my back. I am only able to do what we are able to do to change Washington because I know you want that change. If you wanted somebody to just go up there and go along to get along, you could have sent somebody else. Other people would have done that job for you. The job I'm doing for you is to take on these systems, to force them to account, because that is the only way we are going to put the needs of our people first. And I know that promise still exists. At every one of these rallies we do, there'll inevitably be somebody that'll come up to me and say, do we even have hope? Is the nation lost? Can we save it from the path we are on? But when I see the groups out there who are resisting lockdowns, who are fighting back against vaccine mandates, we've got some volunteers who even register voters at the gas station when people are worried about what Biden's forcing them to pay at the pump. I know that the spirit and the heart of this country remains strong. And the beating heart of patriotism is right here in Northwest Florida. I can't thank you enough. I know we've got more to do. And guess what? They'll be coming for me. You know that, right? Oh, somebody will pop up out of nowhere to attack me and lie about me. But I've let them all know in Washington, D.C., if you jump over the fence into Northwest Florida, you're into my backyard, and I got backup for days. Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for fighting alongside my dad and I. Thank you to James Calkins, to Ray Eddington, my dear friends in local government. Let's go get them.